Hi everyone and welcome back to another C++ tutorial on creating plugins for Cinema 4D. So in the last tutorial we created a user area and we made this little box here with the text. This is a GE user area. Now what I want to do next is just show you how you can actually add some interactivity to these. This will come useful later on in a future tutorial. So let's just get into that now. So I'm going to close down at Cinema 4D. And I'm in the project here and I'm going to our test user area. .h, and I want to add some a method here to capture the input. So let's right click and go to definition on GE user area. So scroll down a bit in here, and what we want is input event called when input is received, and that includes keyboard inputs and also mouse inputs. So I'm just going to go back to that file there and paste that in and save it, and then I'm going to go into the CPP file, and at the bottom here I'm going to add in down here, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, paste in that there, remove the virtual, and we'll just return true here. True just says that we handled this mouse input. And now I'm just going to find an example of this. Again, this is how you can always search the code base just for other examples. So just finding this. Again, Control Shift F, edit, find in files, It's the same thing. And here we have a few examples here. So let's just click on a couple of these. Got this one here. And this is actually going to do exactly what we want. Okay, so I'm in the SDK gradient area. And so I'm just going to copy from, let's just see how long this method is. I'm just going to copy this entire method actually and then delete stuff from it. So I've copied everything in there. I'm going back to my file, to the test user area CPP, and I'm just going to copy this, remove those there, and just paste that in. So now we've got that method in here. Now it's not going to compile yet because there's a few things missing there. Whatever this is. So let's just go back to the other file just for a second, just so I can see what that was. Just need to right click on that. Oh, that's actually a gradient gadget, so I don't want that at all. So I'm just going to ignore that because we're not clicking inside of a gradient or whatever that is, but we want some of this other code. Now, what I'm going to do here is, first I'm just going to kind of clear out a lot of stuff and explain a few things here. So I'm just going to clear out this because we don't need that. I'll add that back in later on. Remove that. And I'm not going to do any mouse wheel interaction. So now obviously I could have typed this all out, but it just takes a lot longer in the video to type that all out. So what we have here is an input event. So when someone does something inside that user area, such as mouse clicks, or you've got your mouse over it and you're hovering over it, and you click a mouse, a keyboard key on the keyboard, that dialog has to have focus for this to happen though. So if the dialog has got focus, so you've clicked on it and then you've got your mouse over it, you can also get events. And that comes in with into this method here, input event, in a base container. Now base container is just a way of storing lots of different information, and they store that information based on these IDs. Now these IDs, it's very similar to what I described in the first dialog. So we create this enum here, and then we pass them, we set our buttons and everything to use those IDs so we can look them up. And base container is a similar principle. So you've got a base container, which essentially you can put any kind of information in there that you want, and then you can get it back out again. So there's a set int 32 and there's a get int 32 method, which is storing a regular number. That's when int is an integer number from 0 or minus whatever to positive 4. I can't remember how much it is. Doesn't really matter. And so anyway, you've got these IDs. Now these IDs that we're passing in here to get this integer value they're set by Cinema 4D. And if you right click on them, You might be able to find some information on some of these. It's described a lot more detail, I believe, in the documentation as well, although the documentation extracts a lot of its information from here directly. So you've got input device, and that describes whether it's a mouse or the keyboard. So if we come over and we can see here, we've got, it's called dev for device. So it's got the int32, it's put it into this this member variable here, and now we're checking it. We're like, are you equal to that? And when we want to check if something's actually exactly the same as something else, we use two equal signs, so equals equals. If we were to just use one equals, it's going to take the value that this gives us and put it into there. So it's kind of assigning it. That's a single equals. Double equals is comparison. So it's comparing, is this the same as this? And this input, it's actually a couple of characters, but that ends up evaluating to a number. And we've got other input devices in here as well. You can see the keyboard there. And there's a few other things. Qualifiers are actually like Alt, Control, and Shift, but we won't worry about that. We're just going to check for the input for mouse. So if the device that caused this event is the mouse, we come into this block here. And actually, I don't need this action either. I'm getting rid of that. And next, we're wanting to know what was actually clicked on the mouse. And so you've got the channel, so the input channel. So let's right click, go to definition. Contains the key or the mouse button that was kind of pressed. And for keys, there's this other reference. You can have key underscore A, key underscore B. But for mouse, we've got a few other things here. We've got mouse left, mouse right, mouse middle. There's a few other ones. The other one that most people would probably ever check would be mouse wheel, and you wouldn't probably really use the other ones. So here we're checking if the input channel, which is assigned to this member variable, if it's equal to the mouse left, then we're going to do something. And now we want to know where the mouse was within that user area. So you can remember that user area that was in Cinema 4D, it was over here on the right. We want to know where exactly inside the user area we were clicking. And so we get that information from here. And the information, I believe, might come in as, I'm getting ahead of myself. But we get the X and Y coordinate of where the mouse is. Now, sometimes in different scenarios in Cinema 4D, it might come in as global coordinates of the whole Cinema 4D interface. It might come in as window coordinates, where you are in your window. And it can also come in local coordinates of where you are on that widget itself. So you get an X and Y coordinate for that. And you can also detect if the person has double-clicked as well. So double-click is a Boolean value, so it's like, yes, they double-clicked. So if this DC comes back with yes, with a true value, then we know that the user double-clicked. And now this next line here, global to local. And what it does, if we right-click and go to declaration, transforms the global window coordinate relative to the top left of the application window, top left of Cinema 4D, to local coordinates to the relative top left of the user area. So describe that a little bit more. I'll just open this up. So it's running Cinema 4D. So when you get this mouse event, it may give you back the coordinate position of the top left of wherever Cinema 4D is on the screen. So if Cinema 4D is like here, it's going to give me this coordinate in the middle of my screen. But because I'm going full screen, it's going to give me this coordinate right at the top up here. And the coordinates, I believe that starts at 0, 0, and then down over here you'll have the full width and height of your window. And so it takes the mouse event that you'll get will be in that coordinate system. And now we want to convert it so that it's in here, so that we have a value, X and Y value, that's relative to being inside of here. So let me shut that down. Go back here. And now I'm just going to run this, and we're going to see what those coordinates are. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. And now I'm going to press play to debug. It's going to compile the code, run Cinema 4D, and load it up. Okay, so I don't know what this error is here. This is new to me as well. Let me just right click and check that nothing's changed here. I did update my system again last night. I let it auto update, and maybe that's changed something again. So let me just try this one more time. I'm going to build, and I'm going to press play. Okay, now it's worked. I don't know what that issue there actually was. But anyway, we're in our user area over here, and I'm going to click somewhere in the middle here. Actually, I'll click right at the top left of this window. So we're coming into this method now. I'm just stepping over. You can press F10 on your keyboard. So our dev value gives you a number there. We're just going to keep stepping through this. So yes, it was the mouse because it's jumped inside of here. Do it again. Yes, it was the left mouse button. So we're now inside of here. We can click over this twice. So now we can see we've got an MX value of 1408 and an MY value of 600. So this is the X coordinate within this entire space here. And we are right over on this side. And now it's got a Y value of 600. Now, this value seems like it's coming from the bottom rather than from the top because it's quite far down. But let's just ignore that fact at the moment. I can't quite remember what coordinate system these were coming in at. And then double click. If I step over that, we're going to see DC is false. So the DC value there says no, we didn't double click because I single clicked. And now it's going to call global to local. And what it's doing is it's passing in these two values. And I'll first just step over it so we can see what the results are. And we can see there we've got a value of 3 and a value of 4. Now that's converted this X and Y value, which we retrieved, which was 1408 and 600. And it's converted it into a local coordinate system of 3 and 4, which is definitely the top left of that user area, because that's where we clicked, because it's very close to 0, 0. So that's the coordinate system there. And then it's just asking it to redraw. Now if I just continue by pressing the continue there and come back in here. Now if I click on the bottom right over here, we're going to get a larger number. And I'll just step through. I'll just put a breakpoint on that redraw. And I'll just press play. And when you set that, it's going to just jump to the very next breakpoint, but only if it obviously succeeds and gets through all this. And so now we've got a value of 511 and 296. So that's the bottom right. So it's saying that our window, our user area, is roughly about that size. And now I'm just going to stop this, and that will stop Cinema 4D as well. And just going to explain what this method is actually really doing. So we've passed in what's called a pointer. So using this @ symbol, what it does is it tells C++ to pass in what we call a pointer to the memory location of this value, this MX, this integer. And you can think of that as as like, imagine sticking your finger in your machine and pointing at your SD-RAM and saying that right there, that point right there is where this integer is stored. It's basically the same thing, which is why they call it a pointer. And when you have a value like this, it's just a plain member variable, and you pass that in, not a member variable, this function, and you pass that in with the ampersand, it passes in a pointer. And you know that's a pointer because if you come into, I'm doing the definition, but I want to do declaration. You know it's coming in as a pointer because there's a star next to it, which means that this is a pointer. And so you pass that in, and then it knows where the location of that memory is, and then it's able to set it. Now there's another way of passing things through, but we'll get to that when we have to deal it. But it's different to passing in pointer. This is passing by reference, but I won't explain that right now. I just wanted to explain why that ampersand is set right there. So it's passing in to this global to local function a pointer to mx and my, and that function can then set those values because it knows where it is in memory, and then the value is changed. So after that function is run, these two values are now different. Well, they could be different if it decides to change them. And now we want to do something with those two values. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up so we can, whenever we click, it just puts a circle on screen. And it's just going to put one circle on screen. And so to do that, what I want to have is I want to store the location of where we last clicked. And I'm going to do that by coming into first dialog. And under here I'm going to go int32 last x and int32 last y. So this is going to be used to store the last location that I clicked. So last time I clicked on X and last time I clicked on the Y. And I'm going to come over to the first dialog, and I want to make sure that these values, when we don't click anywhere at all to begin with, I want to make sure that the circle doesn't appear. And at the same time, I want to, so actually I'll do it this way. I'll make it a bit more clearer. I'll go bool first click. So we'll use this to say if we've actually clicked anywhere. And, or maybe I may say it, circle visible. It's a bit more clear of what we're trying to do. So when this is true, we want to draw the circle. And I'll set that to true when we click inside that area. Now I'm going to come over to first dialog, CPP, and we want to initialize these values so that when this dialog gets created, actually I've just put this all in the wrong place. I apologize for that. I should be inside the test user area. So come in here, copy that out. Okay, we don't want to be in first dialog. We want to be in test user area. Should have caught that earlier. And so I've put those values now into test user area. And now I want to be able to initialize these values when this test user area is created. So I'm going to put a constructor in here. And generally, a good rule of thumb is if you put a constructor in, you should put on in the destructor as well. So if you remember one of the earlier tutorials for setting up the dialog, we described what these were. And the virtual means it's going to override the base version. So it's got this one here. And now what I want to do is come back into the test user area. So I just copied the constructor and the destructor from here. I'm in the CPP file. And right at the top, I'm going to paste these in. And I'm going to turn them into functions with the open bracket, curly bracket. Remove virtual. And now we have our two methods there. And now I want to set those values, and I'm going to do it when this is first initiated, when this is first created, and it gets created when that dialog gets created. And a way to do that is to put in these construct initialization values. So to do that, after this bracket here, you type a colon, and straight after that, you type in the member variables that you want to set. So we have last x and open bracket. And now we're going to set this last x just to a default value. And I'm going to set this to just a value of 0 for now. And then last y, I'm going to set that to 0 as well. And then circle visible, setting that to false, so it won't display the circle. Now it looks like I've missed a underscore at the top of there, and that's good enough for now. So when this test area is first allocated, it's going to initialize these values to 0, 0, and false. And now when we come down to our draw area, let's first actually go down to the input area. So what I'm going to do is just say underscore last x equals mx, underscore last y equals my. And now that I've clicked, I'm going to say circle visible equals true. And then we're going to ask it to redraw, so that method's already been there. Now if we do anything else, if we do a right mouse click, for instance, I'm going to set that to false. But in here, I'm going to copy that return and put that straight under there as well. So now if it comes in, and if we have a mouse event and it's the left mouse, it's going to set the location of our circle, the X and Y location, and tell it to be visible, and do a redraw, and then it's going to return. So when you see a return, that means it's going to leave this function, and it's finished. So if it doesn't have a left mouse input, and then it won't go in here, it'll just skip straight over all of that, and it'll just come straight down to here, and it'll set this to false. So if I click left, it'll show the circle. If I click right, it'll remove the circle. So now we want to draw the circle. So we're going to come up to draw message, and I'm going to set the pen color to a value of red by going 0. R, full R, no green and no blue. And then I'm going to draw an ellipse, and I want the center point to be the location of our last X and last Y. So this is actually a vector 2D. And this method actually takes, let's just have a look at it. It can take in it takes in 2 values, but I believe they're floating point values. This will look very confusing to you, so don't worry about that. Let's just pass in our last X and last Y. Into that, and it's actually taking floating values. You can see there. I believe we can still pass in a vector into this, and it will just change it, but no, it won't actually. Okay, never mind. If I put in a third value, if I was to put in 0, I'm just doing this just to see if Cinema 4D automatically changes it across. It's not doing it, so that's okay. So I'm just going to go vector 2, and then I want a radius. Now this is also a vector 2. And this is because it takes 2 values, because this is actually drawing an ellipse. But because we want to draw a circle, I'm just going to use the same value twice. So I'm going to say 20, 20. So I want it to be 20 pixels by 20 pixels big. And so let's just play that. Oh, but first we need to only do this if the circle visible is true. So if this is true, then it's going to come and run the code in here, and it's going to draw this ellipse. So we'll just save that, and let's just run this and see what happens. We'll leave our breakpoints there, and I'll even put a breakpoint just up here as well. Oh, inside that. See if we get that error again. Doesn't look like we are. I think we're all good. And now what I'm going to do is just right click in here. And I'm going to remove that breakpoint. Just continue. So nothing was hit. Right clicking. Now I'm going to left click. So now it's come and it's set my location, X and Y location. It's made that true and it's asking for a redraw. Now we just continue. And now it's come into the draw method and it said I'm going to try and draw a red ellipse but with the same X and Y, same radius for the ellipse. And now we see our little red circle. Now if I click again, it's going to draw it wherever we click. And if I right click, it should go away. Oh, no, it's not going away. So I've got a bug in my code. So let's just see what's happened here. I believe it might even be just a redraw. So we see there, if I left click, and now I right click, but it's not going away. But if I was to resize this, it'll disappear because now it's redrawing. So we just needed a redraw in here if something happened. Now to avoid additional computation, let's just wrap that in mouse right, and I'll also add a return. I don't need a return there, actually I can just leave it. And I'm going to actually just change this to else if. So what this now does is it's like if left, then do this. Else, if it happens to be right, if it's equal to right, then we'll do this. So this is, if you can imagine this if and else if, this is almost like the long-winded version of a switch statement that we learned in a previous tutorial. And this is just a little bit cleaner here. So now if I was to run that, it would show on the left and then hide it on the right. So we'll just run that and see how that works. So I click with the left, and then I click with the right, and it's gone left, left, right, left, left, right. So that's working as we wanted it to. But one thing I would like to do now is if I was to click in the middle in here, and then I resize this, I want it to stay in the middle. So I'm just going to close that down, and we're going to change our code to allow us to do that. So what we want is we want our last X and last Y to always be the middle of the dialog. And so the best way to do that is to actually change this from being a hard X and Y value located within our coordinate system. We're going to change it so that it's a float value between a value of 0 and 1, almost like a percentage. And if it's 0.5, then we know it's going to be in the middle. It's going to be 50% along 0.5. So let's go to this test user area, and we change this to float, and change that to float. And we go back to our CPP file, and we'll just make sure that we set this as a float. So I'm just going to 0.0. Doesn't need to be, but it just helps when you look at it that you know what it is just by having a glance at what's going on. And now down here, I also noticed that I had these two taken over from when we copied the code. We don't need either of those. And down here, I'm going to set this to be calculated against the current size of this user area. So to do that, we can go int32 width equals get width, int32 height equals get height. So that's going to get the width and the height of our user area. And I'm just storing them in these member variables here so that when we debug we can actually see them. But you could include this directly in the line that I'm about to write. So what I now want to say is that I want the last y to be a percentage of this width. So all I need to do here is divide it by the width. But we actually want that to be a float value. So these values here, this width and height are in 32. We want to divide it by But if you divide an integer by an integer, you won't get that fraction. If you divide, because it's going to assign it. Well, just in C++, if you want to have C++ correctly calculate the floating value, then this needs to be told to work in floating space rather than as an integer. Long way of saying just write float around the beginning of this and then type width. So what that's going to do is we don't even need that there actually. It's going to say treat this as a floating value with decimal numbers, so that when the divide function comes in, it knows that it's dealing with these decimal numbers, and then it should return a decimal value as well. I hope that's not too confusing. I didn't really explain that all that well, but if we just do this and change that to height, it will work. Another way in Cinema 4D that you can actually do this is because they have, so this is not quite strict C++, but they have overridden these float so that these types, so you can actually do it this way as well, which kind of makes it a little bit more cleaner if you're going to look at it. Either way is acceptable in Cinema 4D. So here we're saying this float value is going to take in this width, and it's going to turn that into a float. So I might leave it like this way, just so it looks a little bit easier to read. And now we'll just run that. Actually, we can't run that yet. We just need to set the value at the top as well. So I'm going to copy this here, the get width and get height. And I need to now change this draw function to convert the last x value, which might be 0.5, to an actual integer value of the width, which might be 512. So it's going to go 0.5 times 512, and that will give us a value of 128. So we'll do the same with last y. And I'm just going to change this to x location, y location, or just y. Don't need a lock on there. So that's now going to say that the x value is what a percentage of our viewport where we click times the width. Same with the y. We pass that in. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint here and put a breakpoint down here so we can see what's happening on this as well. And we'll just press play. You see we got some warnings there as well. So I just want to, I'll compile this later and I'll go over the warnings and show you how to remove them, because we'll fix this up so it's a little bit cleaner as well. But anyway, we are here in the viewport. If I click, it's going to get a value of 243 and the width is 514. If I step over that, we're going to have an x value of 0.472. Okay, and the y was 300, that was 142, and now we've got a y value of 0.47, so it's pretty close to the middle, be exactly the same as where we clicked. I'm just going to play that now, and you might be asking, why are we doing this? Because you had that working before, right? You see no difference. The difference is, now if I resize this dialog, it's going to stay in the middle. It's going to recalculate. So if I move that out now and we put the breakpoint in up here and I resize, I'll make Cinema 4D view itself on screen, which will cause the refresh, then we're going to get a much higher value for these. Now x is 653, y will be the same. And if we want to know what the value of that width returned, let's just continue again. If we were in here and we were to keep pressing continue, this is going to keep wanting to draw on screen, so this is just going to keep getting called, which is why it popped up again. But we can see there the width returned, we're on the locals, and this will also show up on auto, a value of 1322. So when that method was called, it returned a value of 1322. But because we're using 0.5 of that, we've calculated the X location should be 653 within the user area. So let's remove that and continue. So I think that's enough for today. We just learned how to use mouse inputs. Actually, before I stop, I will stop right now. In the next video, I'll make it so that when you drag this around, you can keep constantly detecting where the mouse location is and moving that as you go.